Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Freiberger, and this is my slideshow presentation on operating systems and firewalls, information and hardening recommendations for each. So what are operating systems? Operating systems are software that allows a user to interact with a computer hardware through use of applications and interfaces. Operating systems manage the connections to computer hardware and other software that may also be located on the device. Devices that are typically managed include storage devices such as hard drives, SSDs, and also USB drives, network devices such as network interfaces cards and modems, input and output devices such as a mouse, a keyboard, webcam, or a computer display. Now, operating systems have two real essential components: the kernel, which allows it to control aspects of the hardware to read and write data or manage receiving and sending data, and then the user interface, which can either be a graphical user interface, like that which is found on Windows systems, or a command line interface, which can be found on some Linux distributions. Now, there are three types of operating systems that you commonly find on desktop computers. Windows ecosystems such as Server 2016, Server 2019, Windows 7, Windows 10. Some government agencies are still using Windows XP from way back in the beginning of the 2000s. And then Linux for distros such as Ubuntu or CentOS. And then there's Apple's ecosystem, macOS. Now, for hardening a Windows system, you want to limit user access to ensure that they can only access what is needed to fulfill their duties, ensuring that only programs that are actively needed are installed. You don't want to have programs that are not used sitting on a computer or a system, allowing it to be vulnerable. The fewer the programs, the less vulnerabilities that you have on your computer. You also want to install the latest service packs. These often include security updates, preventing vulnerabilities from staying on the computer. Password management, whether that be rotating of passwords or just ensuring that passwords expire after a certain amount of time. Group policies, so that users can be added to groups and they only have the access and privilege within that group. And then baselining, to have comparisons made between typical user activity and to see if there's anything abnormal going on. And for Linux system hardening, you'll see a couple of similarities. You want to limit the root users. Ideally, you don't want too many people to be able to change anything on the system with root privileges. You want to have stack protection, to prevent buffer overflow attacks. And you want to install the latest updates. For the security patches, you want password hashing, some user configurations similar to the Windows groups, and the partitioning of disks. Partitioning allows you not to have all of your data on one section of the drive or only one drive. You can have multiple drives with multiple partitions to have different levels of security within each, so that if they gain access to one, they don't have access to everything. And what are firewalls? Firewalls are devices that manage and filter the network traffic. Oftentimes, they're filtering based on the port number or the TCP packet header. The headers contain the source and destination addresses, the sequence information, and some payload data. An example of one thing that uses the TCP data would be HTTPS. All HTTPS data is sent through TCP. And firewall types. So there's a couple different types of firewalls. There is a stateless firewall or packet filtering. it inspects every single packet and then chooses whether that packet is allowed in or not. And it doesn't look for any trends or anything. Whereas a stateful, while it also inspects packets, it grabs multiple packets and then compares them. So if there's multiple packets that are very similar, it can deny or accept all of those rather than going to each individual packet and accepting or denying them. The application layer is similar to the stateful, however, it actually looks at the content of the data, not just the header. For firewall hardening practices, there's a couple of things that need to be considered. You want to be able to manage the port access. If you're not using a service, you don't want to have that port open for it. Having that port open creates a vulnerability that would allow someone to potentially have access to the system through that port. And if you're not using that port, it shouldn't be open to prevent that. Configure network logging so that it is possible to see the actions that happen on the network, and it can be monitored in case something does happen, but also to look through it and look for anything out of the ordinary. Manage individual rules and policies. If you're using a firewall that already has rules and policies in there as a default, you want to go through them and make sure it's not allowing something in that might be okay in some cases, but in your case it won't be used. If it's being unused, you want to shut it down similar to the port, so that way no one can come in through that port if you're not even using it. You should know that there should be nothing coming in through there. Change control to ensure that any changes that you make doesn't completely break the system. You want to be able to have a backup and be able to ensure that even though there was an update, if something goes wrong, you can go back to the last known working image. And lastly, have both network and host-based firewalls. This essentially creates two rings of protection so that if the network firewall goes down and someone gains access through it, you will still have the host-based firewalls active so that you have a second layer of defense and more time to act. And this concludes my presentation. These are the sources that I have gathered some information from, as well as from our in-class resources. Thank you very much.